Why am I so different from them?
Earth's sun is younger and brighter than Krypton's was. Your cells have drunk in its radiation, strengthening your muscles, your skin, your senses. Earth's gravity is weaker, yet its atmosphere is more nourishing. You've grown stronger here than I ever could have imagined. The only way to know how strong is to keep testing your limits. You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun, Cal. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders.
Welcome to Superhero Cinephiles Podcast, and that intro noise means that Adam Lance Garcia has somehow stumbled back onto the show. Adam, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here, Perry. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always good to have you on. Now you are officially tied with Kellen Conley for most appearances on the show because this is your fourth time.
Fourth time. I thought it was my third. Jesus Christ! You keep on bringing me on.
No, fourth time because you came on with Steele that one time.
Right. Wow, you've made this mistake four times.
Four times.
Jesus.
Yeah. I don't know what's wrong with me. And I like we were talking before, like we were talking before we started recording. I've cut back on drinking, so I can't use that as an excuse anymore.
Yep. Unfortunately, I'm drinking, so who knows what's going to happen tonight?
Yeah. Now today's a pretty interesting episode. Well, this entire batch of episodes we're doing before 100 is it's like I did not plan it this way, but it's like serendipitously the movies everybody requested are like all the movies that Perry does not enjoy watching. So last episode we did Iron Man 3. Next one we're doing Spider-Man 3. After that we're doing the 1997 Justice League pilot, and today we're doing a movie that Adam and I, anyone who was on Facebook back in 2013, 2014, like almost, I think it maybe about like 50% of our interactions were fighting over this movie that we're talking about.
I mean, that in Marvel films, you and I would fight a lot about superhero content, and it was there was definitely like during that period of time, I was like, I don't want to lose Perry as a friend. I just have a disagreement on this movie, and I think we're going to be surprised by how this conversation is going to go, just because hindsight's 2020.
Mm-hmm. I think so too, and I think in both ways it's going to go. It's definitely in interesting directions. And the funny thing is, those fights seem to have stopped around 2016. I wonder why that is. Something happened in 2016 to make that stop. Oh, that's right.
You just kind of realize there's more important things to be terrified and mad about.
Well, that too, but also Zack Snyder came out with Batman v Superman, and
oh my God, yeah. That came out that year. Shit.
Yeah, and most, I think it was 2016 or anyway, whenever it came out. I think I'm pretty sure it was 2016. Whenever it came out, like that's when, because most of your arguments most of what you're telling me about why you were standing up for Man of Steel had to do with what you had expected would happen in Batman v Superman. And then when it didn't happen, you're like, oh shit.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, that is totally fair, because I think it was that what I was hoping to see with Man of Steel was like, okay, like all right, there's choices that I might not 100% agree with, but I'm like, this is the first adventure. Fine, he's making mistakes, fine, and this idea is that he's going to be this, being of hope. which is that something that you and I tend to agree with on that. Like Superman needs to be this hopeful sort of Ted Lasso esque character.
Right.
That's going to be evidenced by Batman v Superman. And then Batman v Superman came out, and it not just shot the bed, it was a bloody shit, and then it rolled around in that bloody shit, and then it threw up on it, and then it was just like, well, I guess I'll just sleep here for a couple of hours. So it's hindsight's 2020. I think that if Man of Steel had gone, if that series had gone in the direction that I hoped, I think it would have helped Man of Steel sort of legacy. As it stands now, I have a sort of like, I can watch it in isolation and be like, okay, I like this, knowing where it goes, it kind of hurts, but like, it's still it's still a very interesting artifact. And I think that's the biggest thing that I have come to really appreciate more so about the DC films as a whole. And when I say a whole, I mean going all the way back to the 1940s. That you really don't get with the Marvel films these days, is that there are so many different iterations of Superman, of Batman, that you can sort of how, even though I don't like the direction Snyder took these characters in fact, I kind of hate them. I still very much can appreciate, like, I'm almost glad those movies happened and that Man of Steel happened, because it allows me to understand this character and better in context. I think, it's I was reading a book. I forget what book it was at some point. It was terrible. It was part of, like, I think it was a Doctor Who book, part of a series of books. And my girlfriend's like, well, why are you reading it if it's so bad? And I'm like, well, I'm reading it because even though it's terrible, because it helps me understand why it doesn't work. Because now that I see what something that doesn't work, and I see something that does work, it helps put that in context. And I can, God willing, I get to write a Doctor Who, I can say, like, okay, I know this doesn't work, and I know why this doesn't work. And the same thing with the Man of Steel, and just the Snyderverse in general. It's like, I can look at it and I can pinpoint the things that I think worked with it and what doesn't. But holistically, it doesn't necessarily work. At least the films that he directed don't necessarily work, for all these various reasons. And it helps me sort of then go and turn around. I'm like, okay, what do I need from a Superman movie? What do I need from a Batman movie? What do I need from a DC film? And why does Christopher Reeve's Superman work better than Henry Cavill, as much as I like Henry Cavill as a person, and or as an actor? I have to sort of, it gives me that extra context. So I think, my relationship with Man of Steel has evolved over time, for reasons that you've already mentioned, and for some of the reasons I just mentioned. It's a weird film.
Yeah. So going back to when this relationship started I remember going into the summer of 2013, right? There were three big superhero movies we had coming out. We had Iron Man 3, we had Man of Steel, and we had the Wolverine. And my thought going into that summer was, oh man, this is going to be great. Iron Man 3 is going to be the best movie of the year. Man of Steel is going to be a pretty close second. And then the Wolverine, it'll probably be entertaining. And it ended up being like almost a complete inversion of that. The Wolverine ended up being my favorite movie of that summer. And then below that, you had way below that, it alternated between which one I disliked more, Man of Steel or Iron Man 3. And it kind of depended on which one I was more upset about at the time. I've come around a little bit to Iron Man 3 because of the biggest thing with it was the Mandarin, but I had other issues with it because it felt more like Shane Black, riffing on himself than it felt like an Iron Man movie, which we talked about in the last episode. And that kind of stuff, like, I was able to look past the Mandarin stuff and actually appreciate it more now that we've gotten Tony Leung in Shang-Chi. And I was able to really appreciate Ben Kingsley, especially, and just like how freaking hilarious he is in that movie.
Yeah.
So the Mandarin stuff is a lot less of a problem for me, but there are other story problems I have with that movie beyond that. And then Man of Steel, there's so much, it's frustrating watching Man of Steel, because, and it's frustrating, ironically enough, on a same level that Superman Returns was frustrating, because both of them have these elements that I really, really, really like, and then others have elements that I'm just like, what the fuck were you thinking?
yeah. I can see that, because it's like, as well, I would love to talk about Iron Man 3. That is a very different podcast episode that I was unfortunately not on. So
that was in my back pocket. I was thinking about asking you, but then someone else emailed me and asked if they could do it, and I said, okay, well, they let me do it.
I'm slightly jealous, but I'm also very happy that I got to talk about Man of Steel, because I think with Man of Steel specifically, to your point about like Superman Returns, like I have positive feelings about both those films, and I think there's almost like a better movie that kind of is a synthesis of those two.
Yes, yeah.
So with Superman Returns, sitting aside the whole Bryan Singer of it all, there's so many elements in that film that I really enjoy as like this quasi sequel to the Christopher Reeve era. I think they have a really great, Brandon Routh is a really great Superman. That the sort of soft spokenness of it all. I mean, setting aside what Kevin Spacey is and who he was, like he's still a really fun Lex Luthor, and there's a lot of things in it, like even like the Son of Superman idea, which is like I remember being like, holy shit, when I saw that happen in the theater. There's a lot of things in that like oh yeah, it's there, but like it never had the sort of crackling excitement action that I really, really wanted from a Superman movie.
Yeah.
And then you look at Man of Steel, and there's a lot of like that propulsive, action heavy stuff that we wanted from Superman Returns, that like he's flying, and like again, you can have a whole conversation about like how like the violence of the Zod fight and how destructive it was, but it's still really like satisfying. Like one of my favorite moments in Man of Steel is when he threatens Martha. Right,
it all comes back to Martha.
Yeah, but it's a great moment because he's like, you think you could threaten my mother? And that was a great, like those like going straight to the cornfield. There's even like this idea of Clark Kent trying to find himself. I like certain ideas of like it portraying this at like Azad as his first contact storyline. There's all these little things that I feel like you kind of wish there was just an amalgam of those two movies some way, somehow, and we could have got something really great.
Yeah. I feel the same. I was thinking the exact same thing when I'm watching this last night. I'm thinking back and forth because I had recently, Derek and I did an episode on Superman Returns. So I had recently re-listened to that, and just kind of serendipitously, it wasn't even in preparation for this, and just like putting that all together and just thinking about it, and my mind was working the entire time when I'm watching this last night, and I just kept thinking, I'm like, if we took this part from Superman Returns and this part of Man of Steel and just kind of like Frankenstein stitch them together, it would have been. And there's so much of that in this movie. And I know on Twitter I often say that I don't want to fall into the trap of always like putting something down in comparison to something else, but it's hard to watch a Superman movie and not compare it to all the other versions there are of this character. And so I want to talk about some of the things that I do like about that I think this movie did really well that I think the other live action movies lacked in some cases because they just didn't really have the tools at the time, because 1978 you couldn't really do a lot of the stuff that they could do, but then Superman Returns, they were so devotional to that, and they were telling a much more low-key story, so there was a lot less need for all the, and just like one thing you've got to give Snyder credit for, like his movies, hate his movies, visually the man is a genius. Like he's just, his visuals are breathtaking. I love like just the entire first hour of this movie is amazing, aside from the Jonathan stuff, which we'll get to. But that first hour, like when he goes, traveling the world, the whole finding himself thing, that was one of the things that I loved about Mark Waid did the Birthright origin story, and that was one of the things I loved about it, was this idea of Superman, Clark traveling the world and trying to find himself before he ends up in Metropolis, and the idea of him being kind of like a conflict journalist and doing all that kind of stuff. I thought that was really awesome, and that worked really well, and it works so much better than when in Superman the movie, he spends like 10 years in the Fortress of Solitude, and then he just comes out and he's Superman. And that part always felt really weird to me when I'm rewatching it. Just like, wait a minute, so he's just been here this entire time? Like,
yeah.
And I like the
trading.
Yeah, and I like the idea of him being out in the world and finding himself and seeing both the best and the worst of what humanity has to offer. I think that's really developmentally important for Clark as a character. And it works really well to see what kind of person he ends up becoming, because it's not just, because I think sometimes you can get into the trap of Superman of being like, well, he's from small town America where people don't lock their doors and everybody's, friendly to each other. So of course so I think him having that experience where he's traveled the world and seen all these different aspects really helps inform his character in a better way. And I think this movie did that really good, showing him, taking up all these odd jobs and helping people when he can. I thought all of that was really well done. And it made me wish that we could have seen more of that in Superman the movie, but I think one of the things that fell behind on is he's not doing journalism work. So again, we fall into the trap of Clark using journalism as an excuse as opposed to something which made sense, back before we had the internet. But now you don't really need to be a reporter to keep your ear to the ground. So I think it works better, and it shows that Clark is a person in his own right if journalism is something he's actually passionate about.
Yeah, and just on another point, like, I think that was some of my favorite sequences, idea of he is a man who's looking for his place in this world. I really liked him like traveling the world, and like one of my favorite sequences is the oil rig, because it's like he's Superman without being Superman at that point. He's like, I have the ability to save these people and I'm going to save them. And he does it without any, like, just because he can. And I think that was one of I was like, that's one of those movie parts I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see like Clark Kent saving people, even though he's not Superman yet. And even with like the school bus sequence, like that was great. Like he could, so he could, so he did. Because I there's that whole Kill Bill idea of like, who the mask, like, is Superman the mask, or like Superman's who he really is, and Clark Kent is the mask. I tend to, much as I like Tarantino, I tend to disagree with that take, because I think what makes Superman is who Clark Kent is. I feel like the best kind of Superman is a man who, how do I phrase this? Superman basically is everything Clark Kent wishes he could be and do on a day-to-day basis. That he, like, here's this ability for him to be kind to everybody, to take care of everybody in a very public way, and do without any need or desire for reward. That's what I want from a Superman.
See, the way I look at it,
like,
the way I always looked at it is there are three aspects to Superman, not two. And so I think that's what the Kill Bill aspect misses, where he's right about Metropolis Clark, but he's wrong in saying that it's Superman and Clark Kent. It's Superman, it's Metropolis Clark, and it's Smallville Clark.
Right.
Those are the three. And Smallville Clark is who he really is. That's who he is when he's with Martha and Jonathan on the farm. That's who he is when he's with Lois and John, or in the TV show, John and Jordan. But it's that, and when he's in Metropolis, when he's wearing the glasses and doing the whole, the wallflower mild-mannered reporter thing, that's the mask. So that's how I've always tried to look at it.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I could see that. I still think that. So like when you see him save people in Man of Steel, you're like, yeah, that's Superman. Yeah, cool. And I think where the film, I watched it recently in preparation for the Snyder Cut, which is a thing I still cannot believe exists. It is a far superior film than the Whedon Cut, even if it is still a mess and over an hour too long. And it is better than Batman versus Superman, but it's still, I don't know what Justice League. It's such a weird, that's another podcast.
Which we did already. So
yeah.
Yeah,
So
we
I was gonna say, like, so with Man of Steel, having rewatched it, like, there's so many moments that I'm like, this is a really good Superman movie, and then there's so many moments I'm like, why is this happening? This doesn't sync up with the story you're telling. And you've already sort of keyed in on that. It's like the Jonathan moment where Jonathan Kent tells Clark Kent to not use his powers. And there's when you hear Goyer and Snyder talk about it, I understand their reasoning. I disagree with their conclusion. It's like, I understand that the idea is that they wanted Jonathan to protect Clark, that he wanted a way to, like, keep his son safe. But it becomes very Ayn Randian in this, like, well, you don't, and that gets hammered home in Batman versus Superman, and even in Justice League. It's like, well, why should I bother? Why should I help these people? They aren't doing anything for me. And that's not Superman. Superman, right. I've made the comparison before, and I think it's pretty accurate. But I can draw a direct line between, like, Superman and Doctor Who. Superman and Doctor Who are the British and American versions of the same character, which are aliens who came to Earth, and their only motivation is to be kind. That is the thing that sets them apart from every other character. They are here to help, and all they want out of humanity is to be the best version of themselves. So when you have Jonathan Kent saying, don't use your powers, it rings false, because Superman just wants to help. I think one of my favorite moments in any Superman movie is still in those little moments, like in the Superman the movie, where he saves the cat. Like, he just gets the cat out of the tree and is just kind. It's a small little thing, and you're like, yeah, that's Superman.
Yeah.
I get emotional thinking about it, because it is one of those, it's just not even like it's a benevolent God sort of thing. It's this person who has who will gain nothing in his interactions with us.
Right.
He gains nothing. He probably loses nothing for the most part. There's a net negative in terms of his interactions with humanity, but what he gains out of it is the satisfaction knowing that he's helped someone.
Yeah.
So when you have, again, having the basis of this character be like, maybe you shouldn't help them. Again, as someone who enjoyed this movie and still has a lot of parts that, like, would give this a sort of a B level now, I still have serious problems with that idea, because it's like, we can debate whether Superman should kill, because that's obviously part of this movie. But but I think when it comes down to the brass tacks, like, you boil a character down, and having Jonathan Kent say, maybe you shouldn't help, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of Superman.
Yeah, that's something that's and that moment, like, I watch this, when I watch these movies now as a father, it gives you a different perspective on some of these aspects. So, like, the example I always cite is the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, right? When George Stacy is dying, and he tells Peter, I need you to stay away from Gwen to protect her. And it's like,
right. Before
my daughter was born, I was just like, that's not fair to put on Peter, man. I mean, he's just, and then after, having a kid, it's like, well, I kind of see his point. I mean, if my daughter was running around with a superhero, I'd probably want her to stay away as well, for her own safety. So I can see that point as a father, and I can see where where Jonathan's coming from in that moment, where it's like he just wants to protect his son, and I get that, but. And, honestly, if I was in Jonathan's position, I'd probably do the same thing. Honestly, I would. But Jonathan Kent is supposed to be a better man than I am.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think I understand you want to show that conflict between that desire to protect his son, but also to help him grow into who he's supposed to be. And I think, you know what, for all its flaws, and it did have a lot of them, especially in the later seasons, Smallville handled the Jonathan Kent of it very well. And John Schneider was able to perfectly capture that dichotomy between, teaching Clark the values that will help him become Superman, but at the same time, also having this desire to protect him. He walked that line very, very well. And I think, I think Snyder should have, watched some of those episodes where they're having some of those conversations, because it would have done a lot of good because that moment when Clark says, should I have let them die? And Jonathan says, maybe. Yeah, I could see John Schneider's Jonathan saying the same thing, but then there'll be a follow-up after that. And every time in this movie, I'm waiting for that follow-up and it doesn't fucking come. That's what's frustrating about it.
Yeah, because it could be just like, should I have let them die? It could have been maybe, no, I just don't want you to get exposed. Like, if you want to use these powers, use it in a way that can protect you and them. I would find a better way of saying it, but it's like, that's what you kind of always want the follow up. It's like, all right, should I let them die? It's like, I want you to protect yourself. If you're going to do this, find a way to protect yourself. It's weird. And this comes to another conversation, and I'm pretty sure you've dealt with this as a writer yourself, where like there is reality, and then there's the reality of the characters that you're telling, of the story that you're telling. To your point, like, Jonathan is supposed to be a better version of us. He is supposed to be someone who is an ideal, and when you have a character like Superman, you want someone around him that has that ideal. So to have him be not flawed, that's not the right way to say it, but to say him almost like agnostic to Clark Kent helping humanity, that is the part that feels so off. It's when you boil it down to this, like, yes, I understand he wants to protect his son. Yes, I understand he wants to make sure that Clark is safe. But the fact that like Jonathan Kent of all people is saying, don't help other people, period. Again, you've kind of said that with the follow-up. It's just like, okay, you've missed the point. You've missed the point. And I think there's a lot, and like, again, to sort of underline your point, it's like, there's a lot of that in the entire film where it's just like, you're almost there. You're almost there. It's like, it kind of feels like there's so many points of like, this movie's almost like an edit or a draft away from being really great. It's weird because like, to bring up a film obviously that came out like 9 years later, The Batman. What I really appreciated about that film that I don't really think any of the Snyder films did. You can argue whether the Dark Knight trilogy did it, but like, it gave Batman an arc. You kind of had this idea of where have you seen this yet?
We did an episode on it actually already. So
okay, great. Because I know you're in Japan, so I don't know when things come out, and I don't want to spoil it because you also have children. So but what I loved about the Batman was he starts off as I'm vengeance, and then he realizes what that actually means, and then it's like, I need to become something more, this vision of hope. And my buddy was laughing at me because I was like pumping my fist at the end of it, because not because of like any action, I'm like, he had a fucking character arc. He like learned and he grew, and he changed his mind, and that was amazing. And you don't have that in the Man of Steel. You basically have him, he's helping people, and then this alien invasion happens, and he decides to help people, but it's also sort of like all reluctant.
Yeah.
And that never changes. Like, yeah, it's just he doesn't learn. Like it's hard, as much as like the Zod death was meant to be like this character changing moment, you don't really see this Superman learn and grow and change. Like he is kind of a straight line. He
if anything, the only thing it seems like he learns is that, and this kind of happened, this continues into Batman v Superman, is that it almost feels like he learns the opposite lesson that he's supposed to be learning, where he's kind of like, well, maybe humanity's not so worth saving.
Yeah. To that point, I feel like they that was the biggest sin for me with Batman versus Superman. Like the moment that like I was already like not into it, but the moment I was out was when he has to go like kill Batman for reasons, because Lex Luthor said so, and he's like, no one stays good in this world, and I'm like, you fucking completely misunderstand Superman. And what pisses me off about, as much as I think Justice League the Snyder Cut is a better film overall than the Whedon cut, as I've already mentioned, it's weird. Like you can kind of pretend Batman vs Superman doesn't happen, like that Superman died at some point, and then they bring him back fine.
Well, I mean, because they completely, change how the world reacts to Superman in the opening credits of Justice League in both versions, right? Yeah. All of a sudden, in Batman v Superman, they're ready to crucify him, but then in the beginning of Justice League, they're like, "Oh, our greatest hero was." Did I miss a movie here? What happened?
Yeah. There's a lot like it's like, oh, he sacrificed himself to just kill Doomsday, but like. It doesn't connect. Like I just think at every point, excuse me, like I think that like they I think with the Snyder verse, they put too much emphasis on being a hero is kind of a burden. This like, why should I'm doing it because I can. I really don't want to. People don't really respect me, and I'm gonna keep on doing it, and it makes it hard. It's kind of sad, where it's like, no. Like Superman should like enjoy. Like there's like one moment Batman vs Superman with like he saves a woman, and they're all like touching him in Mexico or some shit, and you're just like, and he looks so like he looks just sad, and it's just like. I don't know, like you never saw him enjoy being Superman. You never saw him
in this movie, you did see a little bit of like that first flight is amazing because you see him smiling and he's enjoying it and he's loving it. I'm like, yeah, more of that, please.
But to that point, again, to go back to the Randian thing, it's like something that he's enjoying that he can do. It's not like I would have loved. Like one of my favorite moments in Supergirl is when they introduce Superman. And
I was thinking that too.
Right. And it's like they're like, hey, you want to go over there and like talk to them? And it's like, this is my favorite part, like just talking to people that we saved, and like it's just like thanking them. Or what was it? It was like that same episode.
I think I know.
No, it's
where Supergirl, she's like, is there any they're flying in the air, and she's like, and they had just saved like a plane or something like that, and she says, is there anything better than this? And Superman's just like, if there is, I haven't found it yet. Right? It's
exactly like, and or even like the moment in Superman and Lois. I'm way behind. I have not watched the season yet.
I haven't seen the season either, so yeah, I'm waiting until it comes on HBO Max, because I got so fed up dealing with the CW ads on the app, and it's so buggy.
It's so buggy, but like I was really pleasantly surprised with that entire season, that first season. But I loved about that intro is like when Superman lands and the guy's like, cool costume, and the little kid, and he's just like, thanks, my mom made it for me, and I'm like, that's super. It's this pure joy of being Superman, and we never get that in the Man of Steel films. And I and it's same thing like with Christopher Reeve, like you get this sense of like he really loves being Superman. He loves helping people, and that is just, again, there's so many elements of Man of Steel that I do really enjoy, that if I watch in isolation or like watch those moments, like that's Superman. That's what I want to see in a Superman film. Overall, you're just like, I feel like they just, to your point, Snyder's really good at visuals. He's really good at these big ideas and these big moments. But when it comes down to the nuance of characters, they get really lost.
Yeah.
And you don't have, again, you just don't have Superman like saving a cat and enjoying it. Or like helping a kid cross, like an old, like this. I still think one of my favorite moments in any Superman comic is the Grant Morrison moment when in All-Star Superman, where he just saves that one girl from like committing suicide and hugging her. Like, that's Superman. I mean, that one page, that one goddamn page still gets me emotional because it's just him being there for someone.
Which it still pisses me off that they took that they did not have that scene in the All-Star Superman animated movie. I'm
shocked. Because it's like, you know, like I guess I can understand why they cut Samson and the other guy. I forget who it was.
Except they did have that. That was in there.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's for a while since
we did an episode on it a few months back, so it's still kind of fresh in my mind. And that was something that stuck out to me, was that perfect distillation of Superman in that one page, and you leave it out of the story that it comes from.
And especially because it's like such an easy scene animation wise to redo. It's, you know, compared to the other stuff that they're doing throughout the entire episode or entire issue or movie, whatever the fuck it was. And it's like, I guess that's, again, I go back to the most frustrating thing about this movie is that you see him enjoy flying. You see, I like so many things, but like there's just fundamental moments that are missing. You know, it's weird. Like, I feel like the weird thing about the Snyderverse is almost like how much James Gunn has improved it since. And it's
well, I mean, to your point, I mean, Peacemaker has a bigger fucking arc than Superman does in these movies.
Oh God, Peacemaker is so fucking good. It's so fucking good. But yeah,
my daughter is addicted to the intro. Like every time we play it for on YouTube. She stands up, starts clapping, and she starts squealing. Yeah, she loves it.
Oh man, she is not ready for watching the entire series, but I'm glad she's enjoying that at least. No, I because it's like, it's weird. Like the Snyderverse is one of those things where it's kind of had the inverse for me as a viewer. It's kind of had an inverse relationship I've had with the Marvel universe, where like I was all in, as you know, on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and have since cooled dramatically to it. There's a lot of things that like I'll enjoy, but I'm personally not getting a lot out of the Marvel universe that I want. Right. And part of that is I kind of know how the sausage is made, so I sort of, I can't help but see that a little bit whenever I watch these things. But the other part of it is like what I like about the DCEU now is that you're getting more like sort of like you're getting, because things are so poorly formed in that first few years, like since then they're like, yeah, well, you can play in the sandbox but kind of do your own thing. So like the fact that you can have you know, Harley Quinn in the Suicide Squad and thus, but then be in the Suicide Squad, and you know, Harley Quinn and in Birds of Prey, and you can have Shazam take place in that same universe, and Aquaman be in that same universe. You get all this sort of diversity of thought. Like, you know, one of the reasons that you don't like Iron Man 3 and the reason why I like Iron Man 3 is that it feels like a Shane Black film. And that's the thing that I'm missing in a lot of Marvel films. Like, it doesn't feel like, there's a lot of things where I'm like, you could have replaced any director in this. It's like, you know, what is a Russo brothers like signature shot or whatever. Whereas with, you know, the Snyderverse, again, not saying that I love these films, like you're like, all right, these are Snyder films, this is a James Gunn film, this is you know, this is clearly like a there's a distinct James Wan film with like Aquaman. Like, these are distinct takes on these characters that still are set within this universe. So you can have Jason Momoa be Aquaman in this, fun Aquaman movie, and still be the same character in this piece of shit, Batman versus Superman. And I kind of wish that's the one thing like I wish Marvel would do more of, is let the directors besides James Gunn, because I love that guy. I love James Gunn as a director. So this is not a negative, but like I kind of wish that they would do more, letting the directors have their own sort of voice in these films.
I wonder if we're gonna get some of that with Multiverse of Madness, because Sam Raimi's,
I hope so.
Yeah, because that seems like the perfect time to kind of do that kind of thing. With we got Sam Raimi doing a really weird movie, and that's a perfect opportunity to just let Sam Raimi just kind of run with that idea.
Yeah, that's what I'm really hoping. I have very little hope that's going to happen, but it's we'll see. It's like, I think the best worst thing is weird. Like I feel like Marvel has gotten a lot of really great directors and not used them to their full ability. Like even Taika Waititi, like with Ragnarok, like his comedy is in there, but like his visual style really isn't in there. It's very like, in the structurally, it's very Marvel based, but like it's peppered in with a Taika Waititi like flavor. I would almost describe it. It's like, like basically it kind of feels like with how Marvel has been doing things, it's like everyone gets a base recipe and you have to make it based on this recipe, but like you can sprinkle in your own flavor, like concoction, and some of those like will be more like flavorful than others, like Taika Waititi or hopefully Sam Raimi, where I kind of feel like DC is more like, look, just do what you just do it, just whatever you want to do, go do that, make that movie. And then you get the Suicide Squad, which, while not my favorite James Gunn film, it feels like he was able to play in that sandbox and do something very unique. And again, same thing with James Snyder. Like I don't agree with his choices, but I do appreciate the fact that he got to make the movie that he wanted to make.
It's so going back to Man of Steel, going back to what you're saying about, I want to talk about some of the Jonathan stuff, because that scene when he shows Clark the spaceship and he's talking to him, like,
right,
I got chills watching that scene, right? And like I got kind of choked up when Clark says, "Can I just go back to being your son?" He says, "You are my son," right? And it's just like that right there, that is perfect Jonathan Clark interaction. And it's just like you're right there. You just need, let's keep that scene going a little bit longer. But the thing that drives me really nuts about the Jonathan of it all is the tornado scene. Because it's just like that. I mean, I can understand in some part, like Clark holding back and not being sure if he should go or anything like that. But, to have Jonathan die, and then what ruins that scene completely, though, is what happens right after it. Because as that scene is ending, you got Clark's voiceover when he's talking to Lois, and he says, "I let my father die." And I'm just like, that is the most anti-Superman thing you could ever have in a Superman movie. Is I let someone die. And that's one of the things that was so perfect about Jonathan's death in Superman the movie, is that it's something that he cannot control. And that you contrast that with what he says at Jonathan's grave in Superman the movie, when he says, all these powers, all these things I can do, and I couldn't even save him. Right. It's a humanizing moment for him. It makes him realize that even though he's got all these powers, he is not a god. And Man of Steel completely flips it in something else. And then and from that point on, he almost does feel like a distant god.
Yeah. And even then, like with like also Superman, just to sort of go back to that as well, like you have the same moment where Pa Kent like has a heart attack and he hears it and he's like, no, and like my Pa, like he's like flying as fast as he can, like his like he's going so fast, like his flames are coming out of like himself off his suit because of friction. Like he's like, I can save my Pa, I can save everyone, and it's like, and he can't do it in time. That is a more humanizing moment than anything that you got in Man of Steel. To your point, it is very much like this Snyder and Goyer wanted to make these moments, and in and of themselves, they're fine. They don't connect to make a really coherent narrative. Or can hear even not a coherent narrative, a coherent character. And again, I think that is one of, like, the Jonathan novels is perfect sort of distillation of what's wrong with this movie, is that you have these things that they want to say and these moments that they want to have, that they lose sight of how those all sort of connect together. They're thinking of, and again, this is a Snyder problem in general, but like, he really wants to have the Dark Knight, like, Returns shot in Batman v Superman for reasons, not understanding why that belongs there and not here, or the same thing with, like, even like with Watchmen. It's just like, like, that film looks amazing, and I happen to like Watchmen, in general. I like some of the creative choices he made, but like, there are certain things about that where it's like, you wanted to make it this big, like, sort of celebration of action and superheroes, but it's like, when it's not that. It is a distinct sort of breakdown of why these are not okay.
It's the complete opposite of a celebration of superheroes.
Exactly. So and that kind of transfers forward with Man of Steel, where he really wants to show Superman but beating up a guy. He really wants to show Jonathan struggling to be a father to this superpowered being. He really wants to show people being scared of, like, this unbelievable power, but it doesn't connect to be that Superman story. It becomes something other. A conversation that I've had with Tommy Hancock about Batman versus Superman was that he could enjoy it if he just sort of thought about it as, like, this is Ultraman and Nightman or something like that. And that's would have been fine if it wasn't for the fact that this was a Superman versus Batman movie. Like, it's almost like if this had been set in the Boys universe, or this had been set in, or this was a completely a pastiche character that's like, breaking down this Superman mythos idea, it would be more successful. But because it's Superman, it misses the mark. Not holistically, but like, I think holistically it misses the mark, but like, there are moments where it gets close to the bullseye. It's like, if we were going to compare this to a dart game, like, they lost the game, but they got some really close bullseyes.
I think too, one of the things is, and I think because watching this movie, I felt the same thing the way I feel when I watch, like, Constantine or the Tim Burton Batman films. Is like, they're good movies in themselves, but they're not good movies for those characters. They're terrible adaptations of those characters, and this movie feels a lot like that. And I think one of the reasons why I'm more positive about Constantine and more positive about the Burton Batman is because we weren't being told, especially at the time. Like, now it's a different story, because now that we have, Tyler Hoechlin on Superman and Lois, it completely changes that context. But at the time, Warner Brothers was like, this is Superman. This is the only Superman you're going to get in live action. So you better like it, because there's nothing else coming. And at that point, I'm like, well, no, then you're not. I mean, I can accept it if it's, this weird vision of the character, which, kind of like when we talked about, I think we mentioned this when we talked about Joker. And it's like, I don't think that's not a Joker movie, but it's fine, because that's not the one and true Joker we're getting in the universe.
And I think the other thing, go on.
I'm sorry, I was just wrapping up the thought. Go ahead.
No, and I think to your point, it's well, the biggest difference though I think Batman's a weird outlier when it comes to how we talk about superheroes and superhero adaptations, because Batman, more than really any other character, has such a, has such a range of adaptation.
Yeah.
The best thing that ever happened to Batman, in my opinion, is the Adam West show. Because the Adam West series was so over the top and so campy, it allowed you to sort of see like, okay, this is how far we can go. And then Batman, like the Burton films, you can have like, okay, now we're here, you know, and it might not 100% work with your Batman, like how you perceive Batman, but now you've had like, well, it's distinctly different than this. And so like, okay, but like they're so far afield. There's like they're other sides of the fucking spectrum that you're like, okay, well, like I understand like there's difference. But you know, with then you can have like the Dark Knight be sort of like somewhere on a different part of that spectrum. You can have the Batman on a different part of that spectrum. And then you like when you start taking into account the animated series, like you can have, you know, the Super Friends and the Batman, the Brave and the Bold, and the Batman the animated series. There's and like the movie serials, like there's all this range. The thing with Superman was the version of what we identify as Superman was very much codified very, very early on, you know, with George Reeve, with Christopher Reeves, and you know, to even like the animated shows, like the Max Fleischer, there really wasn't that much range. Like, you know, again, you take 66 Batman and the Burton films, they're just so different. That you're like, you're willing to accept variation. But you look at like George Reeves and Christopher Reeve, they're very close. They're relatively close. It's just one's takes things a little bit more seriously than another. And then you get Man of Steel, which really doesn't, it's basically gets a little bit further away. It doesn't really it doesn't go that far out of field, but it goes far enough out of field of this little codified like bracket that we know it's not, something's wrong. You know, if you had like a Superman 66, that had, or like, you know, there was campy versions of Superman, but like if you had something that like was part of the zeitgeist, that was like Superman 66 or whatever, then you could sort of accept a Man of Steel a bit better, because you would have a wider range. You know, so in some ways, I don't necessarily think, and I sort of talked about this at the beginning, like I don't necessarily think Man of Steel is that great of a Superman film, but the best thing about it is that we went from Christopher Reeve and George Reeves in live action. We had like the TV shows. We're not going to really count them for now, because the less said about Dean Cain, the better. You know, but now we have like the Man of Steel. So now we know we know the edges now. It's a little bit wider. So then and we have Superman, like, you know, Superman and Lois, and it's somewhere in here. And then hopefully, like, the more Superman we get, the wider and wider we can sort of like play with this character and understand what makes him work. So you can accept, like, I can accept Man of Steel and the Snyder stories better now, because to your point, we have Superman and Lois. We have all these different things. It's in some ways time has been kinder to Man of Steel than I think other films have, like than it's been to other films, because again, to your point, we have that greater sense of context. We understand what they're like. We understand like where this version of this character fits in to the wider canon.
And I think too, something else that that I was picking up on this is the Zod thing too. Just like something weird about this Superman, and I'm noticing, is that he seems like a very passive character throughout the entire movie. Like he doesn't really make any decisions on his own. Everything he does, it's something someone else tells him to do, which is really kind of a weird point. That's a weird thing you do. And I understand. And after I thought about that, I was thinking about that in comparison to the Donner film. And there's some of that in there too. You know, to be fair, there is some of that in there. Like, you know, Jor-El's giving him this mission and all that. So there is some of that there. But there's this one scene after his first night in Metropolis when Jor-El says, "So you're revealed to the world now, so be it," right? And there's this idea of like, where it's almost kind of like he's saying, "Whoa, I didn't mean, make everybody know who you exist." But that's a choice that Clark makes in that movie to reveal himself to the world. And when he, and you can talk about the time turning back thing and how it's kind of a weird way to resolve stuff, but it is him making a choice that goes against what Jor-El has told him. And you've got that line from Jonathan repeating, "You are here for a reason." And that is Clark making his own decision. He never really makes his own decision in this movie at all. Like Jonathan tells him to stay hidden. He stays hidden. Zod tells him to reveal himself. He's considering it. And then the priest tells him, "Well, you should have faith in humanity." And then he has faith in humanity. And then Zod tells him, "This is either going to end with you dying or me dying." And then so Superman kills him. He never makes a fucking decision in the movie.
Yeah. And also to your point, like, remember, like with the, like, so you revealed yourself to the world. He's so excited about it, how happy he is. And that's something, again, but again, I agree. Like, he's very, very passive. He's very passive in Batman versus Superman as well.
Yeah.
It's a very passive Superman, which is an interesting choice. Like, he's not making any active decisions. And that's, I hadn't thought about that. I think that's a really good observation. And it's also, like, again, one of the more disappointing aspects of this movie.
Well, also too, and like I think I feel like Henry Cavill more than anyone else got really robbed. I mean, at least Brandon Routh got a chance to play Superman how he would have played him in Crisis, but Henry Cavill doesn't seem like he's ever going to get that chance, because there's so much good in these. We get these brief flashes of what he's capable of. We see him at points in this movie where he's really charming. In the Justice cut, he's Superman in that movie. It's for all this bad CGI lip. I mean, like, he's charming, he's affable, he's kind, he's funny, and we get a little bit of that in here, like when he's talking to Martha, or when he's or when he's that scene when he's when he and Lois are in the interrogation room, and he's just kind of, and he's just sitting there, and he's handcuffed, but he seems more relaxed in that scene than he does at any other point in the movie. And I think. And I'm thinking back to Superman the movie, and one of the things I think Christopher Reeve captured that I don't know if any actor, Hoagland maybe, but would he really capture? And even Hoagland, I don't think quite gets to it when he's in the costume. But I think what Christopher Reeve did that I don't think any other actor has done, and so it's not a knock against Cavill, it's a knock against pretty much everybody who's not Christopher Reeve, is that Reeve looks so comfortable as Superman, right? That scene when he's being interviewed by Lois, and he just kind of sits down in the chair, and he's like kind of slouched, and he's very relaxed, and it's just like, and she's just completely awestruck by this god who's just sitting here, and it goes back to something Grant Morrison said in his depiction of Superman, was that if you're invulnerable, if nothing can hurt you, you would have no reason to be tense. And I think there's this tension to all these other, and I think and part of the reason is the pop culture depiction of Superman is like, but with the hands on the hips and everything, but it makes so much more sense. The way Reeve does it is he looks very relaxed in the entire time.
I mean, just to hammer home that point, like honestly, no actor to my mind has fully embodied both Clark and Superman in the way that Reeves did, because I know a lot of people talk about it, and it's kind of at this point cliche to talk about it, but the moment where he debates revealing himself to Lois on their date, when he takes off his glasses and he stands up straight, it is one shot, and just one of the best performances, one of the best physical performances I've ever seen in a superhero film to this day. 40 years later, over 40 years later, just you see that, and you're like, he goes from Clark to Superman. And if you told me they CGI'd two different actors together, I would believe you, because the change is so dramatic. And speaking to the Donner films in
just
general,
one
I do
quick
want to
thing
mention.
before, and just want to mention that Derek had always called that the greatest special effect in that movie.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Like I saw someone on Twitter call it like the best magic, like a great magic trick. But yeah, it is easily the best. Like to agree with Derek, God rest his soul. Like, yeah, 100% best special effect in the entire goddamn movie. I think of that shot lives rent free in my mind. And I wish I could. It's one of those things where like I always feel like I'm kind of living towards, like if I could ever write a story or direct something that like has a moment as quiet and as subtle and as powerful as that, of him feeling so assured because of the effect he had on Lois, that he goes from Clark to Superman and then questioning that choice and then putting his glasses back on. It's an entire narrative without any words, and it's all physical, and it's such a great thing. But to the Donner of it all, I have a friend, I'm gonna name drop him. So a cat I know named Chris Chapman recently put together something called Superman 2 the Zod cut, which merges the Donner cut and the Lester cut, and it has, I don't want to spoil it, but it has the best ending version of either cut, in a way that you kind of wish. I having watched it, I'm like, oh, that's so much better. That's so much better than what we got in the Donner cut. It's so much better than we got in the original theatrical cut.
I'm not sure if it's like when I watched the Donner cut, like that moment when he drops Lois off at the balcony and he flies off and she says like, oh, there he goes again. He just flies right out or something like that. That's where I stopped watching the movie, because that's my ending.
Yeah. And that's what he did.
Okay.
He stops it there, and like he has Superman fly off and like put the flag on the White House and apologize, like it won't happen again, sort of thing. And then like he flies off, and it's like, it's just you're like, oh my God, like that's like, I want to see that movie. I want to see I want to see the next chapter, because it's like Lois knows.
Yeah.
And they can't be together, and he's going to be like he's still Superman. We still have like the sort of like comeuppance to the bar guy, like the diner, but like you still have this sort of like triumphant moment at the end that doesn't undo everything that made that movie special.
Yeah. And something else I want to talk about here is that ending scene, the scene with Zod. I think if you're going to do a Superman kills story, there has to be some sort of payoff. There has to be a buildup and a payoff, and this movie doesn't really give us either. And I think I think it was Mark Waid who said this. Like, if you're going to have Superman kill Zod, show him struggle for it. Right? Like, show Zod putting more people in danger. Like, show him like chucking cars at civilians and Superman having to try and catch everything, and show Superman actually trying to save people in the midst of all this destruction instead of just punching back all the time. So it builds to that moment when finally he has to kill Zod. But then after that, you also have to show how that's going to affect him going forward, because this movie doesn't do that. Like, everybody cites the John Byrne story where he executes Zod, which, full disclosure, I do not like John Byrne's Superman. I think he missed the mark on a lot of aspects of that character. But one of the things that people are leaving out of that is that wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of John Byrne's story, but then other writers came in and they spent like the next 10 years dealing with ramifications of Superman making that choice. And Man of Steel, and we had hoped that we were going to get that in Batman v Superman, but even like Batman's not even in the best interpretation of it, it's not because he killed Zod, it's because he caused all this destruction, and we never get that pay. In fact, we open up and the first time we see Superman in that movie, he slams a human being through a wall. I mean, come on. Yeah,
it's funny because like, you and I talked about this way back in the day, but like for me, I especially like watching Superman 2, like I never, my memory of it is that like he kills Zod. Like, where does Zod and Ursa and I forget the third cat's name, Non? Thank you. Like, where do they go? Like, they fall into this bottomless pit. They just slide and they're gone forever, and we never see them. I mean, obviously, this is setting aside the ABC cut, which has apparently shows them getting arrested, which is the thing I didn't know existed. It shows like Zod and everyone getting arrested along with Hackman's Luther getting arrested. So I can understand why there was a generation of folks that like grew up not knowing that, like, believing that Zod survived. Where I grew up thinking like, well, clearly he's dead. I don't see a body, but like I also saw him drop into a bottomless pit that didn't go anywhere. So I never had the issue of whether or not Zod, that he killed Zod, because I felt like for at least to my memory at the time, and I think it's important to remember, like, we're discussing about like how I felt about this movie at the time,
and also that was the Lester cut too.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily like with Man of Steel specifically, like I didn't really object. I was surprised, but I didn't object to the idea of him killing, because I didn't have in my mind this perception that Superman doesn't kill. I mean, Batman doesn't kill. That was a big part of it. So it's, which is a whole nother conversation when you start taking into like even the Burton films and the Snyder films. But like, I never had the perception that like Superman didn't kill. So when I saw him kill, I was like, oh, wow, that was shocking, but not like fundamentally shocking in the way that like it was for a significant portion of the audience. That being said, to your point, like it was very much like the reason I defended this film, and the reason why you and I would fight about things, was because I was certain that Batman versus Superman would sort of show this advancement of the character, that he would regret this choice, that he would decide to not do these things, that he would try to be this beacon of hope. Again, in the way that kind of the Batman does, which is so much better movie than this will ever be. So that was what I expected. One of my favorite parts about the Batman versus Superman is the opening sequence, because you see like, you kind of see it from the ground level, like this big destruction of Metropolis, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, like in some ways he's answering his critics, it's giving Batman motivation to do these things. I'm down with it. And then to underline your point, it's like the next thing we see him do is basically kill a guy after they killed Jimmy Olsen.
Yeah, whenever people say that the Ultimate Cut is better, my response to that is it's more coherent. It solves the problem of Batman v Superman being an incoherent movie. It solves that problem, but the rest of it is still terrible.
Yeah, like my version, like the version, if I could have written this, and this is what I kind of expected going to that movie, was the idea that like Lex and Bruce would have started in the same place, and like they saw this destruction of Metropolis, like we can't trust this character, and they basically diverge from there,
right? Where
Batman's like, I need to destroy him. Wait, no, maybe he's good. And then like you see like Lex is like, I must destroy him, he's bad, and blah blah blah. And then like there's maybe a fight between Batman and Superman, but like midway through the movie, and it's like, no, he's good. That's kind of what I was expecting.
Oh my god, I just had this flash, and hearing you say that just made me think, what if you had kind of taken some Smallville aspects where Lex and Clark are friends in Smallville, and they had that relationship from Smallville, and at first Lex knows he's Superman, right? And at first, he starts out being a champion of Superman, and then the Zod thing happens, Metropolis happens, and that's when they start diverging. Whereas Bruce starts off being untrustworthy of Clark, Lex starts off being trusting him, and then they both diverge from there. And I think that's I want to see that movie now.
Yeah, so that's actually similar to that's very similar to what Jamal Igle and I have in mind if we ever were to write a Superman story. So Jamal Igle is a really talented artist who I am very lucky to consider a friend. And
he did the Wrong Earth, brilliant series with Tom Bayer.
He is such a great artist, and he's a great storyteller, and he's a good guy. And we had this idea of like almost like in reaction to Batman versus Superman, and our own discussions about Man of Steel of, you know, we call it Superman Hope. Mm-hmm. And this whole idea is it's essentially about Lois and Lex. Mm-hmm. And it starts the day after Superman arrives on Earth, like whatever it is in this version, like it's Superman's revealed to the Earth. Mm-hmm. And both Lois and Lex are very suspicious of this character, and like they sort of team up and try to, like, not necessarily team up, but like they're both trying to like figure out who this guy is. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's this idea of like this character, all he wants to do is be kind. That doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. Who does that? You know, and then Lex becomes Lex Luthor, xenophobic and a piece of shit, you know, and he tries to like destroy Superman, and Lois falls in love with him. That's like the arc. Start in the same place and they diverge. Yeah. Our biggest twist on that idea, the thing from my own experience with like working at MSNBC, the thing that I really want to do is, when you work at a news station as a producer, for example, you don't always talk or see your reporters. Mm-hmm. You are like at a computer and you're typing their things in, and they're just reading your copy, and you might never meet them, or because they're like. And so I had the idea is that Clark would be one of the producers at this station, like, and Lois is like a reporter for the station, and she never meets him because like there's just hundreds of people like just going around. She might talk to Clark over like the headset, which is the thing that's happened. And she'll know like Jimmy Olsen, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna go get lunch with the new guy Clark, you want to join us? And he's like, no. And you never see Clark. Like the idea in the story is like you never see Clark. You see Superman, but it's like because he's talking to like Lois or with Lex, where he's like flying in the distance, but you never see Clark. And then the last panel is like when the story is like Superman is a good character, is hopeful, like so like the end of the story, all the people are watching the TV, and as they kind of all disperse, there's one character left, and it's Clark Kent. And you realize that you've actually seen him in the background throughout the entire series. Yeah. And he takes off his glasses as he flies away.
You just hit on what is my ideal version of Clark Kent. Is he's the ultimate wallflower, because that's how you can be a great reporter. That's how you can hide in plain sight. Is it because if you're Christopher Reeve, as much as I love Christopher Reeve's performance, I don't love his Clark Kent so much because he draws so much to attention, and it makes you wonder, like, how the hell is this guy get a job at a newspaper? And he's almost like cartoonishly bumbling. And whereas and I think Brandon Routh we got a little taste of it in Superman Returns, where he's always just kind of in the background. He's always just very kind of unassuming, and nobody really notices him there. And Mark Waid also did this in Birthright, where they invite Clark out to the party, and they tell him the wrong location, and like nobody even really remembers who he is. Like he's always just kind of there. And I think that's the best way to do Clark Kent, is you have him be like the ultimate wallflower. Because I've always had a problem with the super confident George Reeves, John Byrne, Clark Kent, is he's got too much going for him. Right? Yeah. It's kind of like I think you have to have something where Superman has some sort of he has some sort of troubled existence in some way, and it's the fact that he can never be himself when he's going about his daily life. And I think that's kind of a sacrifice he has to make.
Yeah, I could see that. I kind of feel like I don't necessarily think that Clark in the version that I pitched, like I don't necessarily think that like he's a complete wallflower. I definitely, like, he's friends with Jimmy. He has relationships with people. It's a combination of two things. One in which Lois doesn't have any interaction with him. Like, even though they work together, they never met. Like, there's, especially like working like my current job is I work at Condé Nast. There are people that I have never seen that I work with on a day-to-day basis that I have no idea what they look like. And that is, so it's totally plausible that they could work together and never meet.
Right.
The other part of it is, it's like, part of the problem with the way Superman stories are portrayed, just by the nature of being Superman stories, is that the person we see in the foreground is Superman. So it's really hard for us to suspend that disbelief that no one can figure this out.
Right.
Like, he's right there. He's right there. We can, how can you not? So the idea with Superman Hope is always like, well, what would it be like for everybody else? Like, if we just took this ground level of like, all we see of Superman is this like flying through the sky. The only people who actually see him in person are like maybe Lois and or Lex, or maybe like some people here and there. And and he can do this thing where like he's getting a photo taken where like he shakes his head really quickly. It's a blurry face. Like there's ways around people not knowing Clark Kent is, because again, to the layman, all they'll see is this thing flying overhead. Like one of my favorite shots in like Superman Returns where he's back and they're like, there's these aspects of like you could hide it. And I think I've never seen a story like that where you understand who Superman is, but you never act like, what does it mean to be on the ground? Suspend, like, help us understand why a guy could just put glasses on and hide. And also to that point, like I've had people where they have glasses on every single day, and then they didn't wear the glasses once. I didn't know who the fuck they were at first glance. I was like, wait, who? Oh wow, that's Laurie.
The way I always looked at it is because when I look at Clark Kent as the ultimate, because nobody notices Clark Kent, nobody pays attention to his face, so it doesn't like. And I think Superman Returns is this a little bit where there's that one scene when Richard and Lois are talking about Superman. They look at Clark and they're like, "Hey, doesn't he kind of look like?" But then they just kind of laugh it off, like that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's that thing because they might look alike, but I might see someone who looks like Tom Cruise on my way to work. It doesn't mean I think I just saw Tom Cruise on the subway.
Right. It might have been Tom Cruise.
It might have been Tom Cruise, yeah. But that it's that kind of thing where it's the hiding in plain sight thing, and nobody ever notices him because nobody ever pays attention to Clark Kent. And that was kind of like my way of looking at it, which is why I think if you have him either being man of action Clark Kent like George Reeves or John Byrne did, or Dean Cain even, or if you have him be like bumbling Clark Kent like Christopher Reeve did, is that it draws too much attention to Clark Kent. Yeah, and I think that's go on. No, I was just saying I think that's an issue, is when Clark is drawing attention to himself, when Clark should be the one who is never drawing attention to himself.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, so what's weird about this movie, Man of Steel, is that like we only ever see him as like sunglasses on, like for like a minute. And the only reason like you're sort of like you can accept that no one knows who he is because he has like a beard like the first half, and then like he's not really, but we never actually see him as Clark Kent. Right. And even like in Batman vs Superman, we never actually see him as like the Clark. God, that movie is so bad.
One of the problems I had with the Clark Kent in this movie, it's one of the same problems I had with Clark Kent in Smallville, is that to accept that that nobody's going to believe that Clark Kent and Superman are the same guy, you have to either be a complete idiot or you have to disregard a whole lot of other stuff, because in Smallville, Clark's the center of all this weird shit happening in Smallville. Yeah. Everybody's seen him use his powers at some point. I mean, Lana Lang, probably has brain damage for all the time she's gotten knocked on the fucking head. And they did it. And I thought, if Lex Luthor, because I love Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor, I thought if you're going to have
such
him,
a good
I thought if you're going to have him be like one of the smartest men on the planet, like he's portrayed, and like Rosenbaum does a great job of portraying him, then you can't really, there's no way to believe that he won't figure out. But then so they got around that with amnesia, which was stupid. But then you have everybody else in Smallville and Metropolis who's seen all this shit, and everybody knows that Clark Kent has superpowers, and nobody's like, But it's the same thing in this movie where you have Superman and Lois literally making out right in front of the editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet, and then this new guy comes to join the Daily Planet, who I don't know how Clark Kent gets a job at that newspaper when he's got no background at all. He comes in, he starts a relationship with Lois right away. He moves in with her, and it's like nobody ever thinks, hey, gee, you know how she was making out with Superman in the aftermath of that battle? Do you think maybe that this guy who just suddenly joined the Daily Planet and kind of looks like him, they might be the same guy? Do you think maybe?
That's so funny. I hadn't considered that. Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, again, I think that goes back to the biggest issue with this series is that there's a lot of moments that they wanted in there, which is cool, but they don't connect as a coherent narrative.
Yeah. Something else too about this, and you know what? And I know this isn't a fault with Snyder, because Bryan Singer did this, Richard Donner did this. Is I am so over the Superman is Jesus parallel. It's because I think the whole thing about Superman is the whole story is, his father is sending him away because the planet's about to explode. He's the ultimate refugee story. He's not sending him away to be the savior of mankind. That's not what he's doing. And I think that's one of the things that as I get older and as I watch these movies more and more, that's something that always irritates me is I think that it works so much better as the ultimate refugee story.
100%. And it's just like, I also, it's the ultimate outsider story, the ultimate immigrant story. The idea that like he's Jesus also forgets the fact that his creators were freaking Jewish.
And he was based more on Moses than anything else.
Yeah. I think there's so much meat on the bone of an immigrant who came to this country, to this world, and all they want is they're like, yeah, I still believe. Like, what? God, there was there was this really great, maybe it was this. I can't remember who said this, and I'm gonna paraphrase it, but like, like I believe in America even though it's never believed in me. And America has been never America to me, but I will still fight for America, sort of idea. I think that
might have been James Baldwin, but I'm not 100%.
That might have been James Baldwin, yeah. And that is what Superman should be. It's just like, it's Earth, like, humanity has been never been humane to me, but I always believe in humanity.
Right. That's one of the problems I had with the scene with the priest, is that Clark says, I don't know if humanity can be trusted. Like, that's not something that Clark should say.
No, no, it's 100% not something that he should say.
Those positions should be reversed. It should be Clark saying what the priest is saying.
Exactly. And I think that's like there's so many points in this movie that you're so close to getting it. It's like when you see like a conservative, like an alt-right self-own, where they're just like, they're so close to getting it. They're so close. You're like, oh, you're almost there. You're almost there, Kevin Sorbo. You're almost there. Nope. You're an idiot. Sorry.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in this movie. One of the things too, I want to talk about the suit a little bit, because the suit has gotten some controversy, and I will say my only real issue with the suit he has in this movie is that, well, there are two issues. One is, I think there's too much blue. There should be a little bit more of a visible break, I think, in the midsection. Doesn't have to be the trunks, but I think you should have and I think the Superman and Lois, the new suit he wears in that works mostly, but I think still the shield is too small. I think one of the things you have to have is that shield should cover the entire chest, because it makes the actor look broader. But also is I think they just have the red belt, where I think it should have some yellow in there too. And I think that's if we get some sort of merger of these, because they got those little yellow trims in the side of the Snyder suit, and if we kind of combine those two together, I think we'd have what would be a perfect Superman suit in live action.
Yeah, because it needs to be like gold and red in some way to sort of like help like break it up. And like I think like I don't think it should be the entire chest because I think you need some blue, but like it does need to be a larger S. Like that's my biggest issue with the Superman Returns S. It's like just it's so small. Like I kind of feel like it needs to be like the majority of the chest. To your point, it broadens the character, makes them seem bigger than they really are. And it's I like, there's a lot of things I like about the Snyder Henry Cavill costume. Like I think the S is really cool.
Yeah,
I think it's the right size. I like the cape a lot. I think the length of the cape and how it's positioned is really nice. I
think it's a little bit too long. I think it kind of,
that's fair.
I think it should be a little bit shorter, but other than that, that's a minor thing in comparison to other stuff.
Yeah. Also, did you know that most films tend to choose CGI capes over practical capes?
Yeah, I found out about that when they were making Superman Returns because they left the yellow S off of the cape, and the reason was because it made the cape much more difficult to animate in CGI sequences. See, I saw you post that on Twitter, and I'm like, doesn't he know that most of the capes are CGI?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like most of the capes are CGI. Like I remember when how I learned about that was in WandaVision. There's one specific scene where Vision is literally crossing a field, and if you want, I don't know if it's still there, but because they might have revised the cut because they sometimes do that you could see the shadow of his cape fall out of sync with his shadow. And I asked a friend of mine at ILM, and I was just like, why the fuck is this happening? And he said it's because like basically capes having a CGI cape gives them more options. It gives them more control. And while I think this Man of Steel has more practical capes, like there's certain shots that clearly are practical, like usually for close-ups and things like that. Like when his he steps forward and the cape kind of drapes over. I think for like the majority of the rest of the films, like it's all just a CGI cape. There's a part of it like in theory I understand, but also I'm like, really, did it really help you like to like not have? Okay, fine, whatever.
But one of the issues I have with it is a story issue, and it's that the suit comes 100% from, and I had the same problem with the Richard Donner movie, is the suit 100% is of Krypton, right? And I think, and it takes away that moment, like you said in Superman and Lois, when the kid says, "Nice costume," he says, "Thanks, my mom made it for me." Like, I love the idea of Martha having input on the costume. She doesn't have to make the costume, right? But like the whole idea of her helping design, and I think Birthright's such an amazing story. It did a really good job of doing this because it shows her and Clark designing the costume with the Kryptonian elements that they have at their disposal. And I think that's a great way to do it. And even like in this, like he gets the costume, fine, but it's the Kryptonian costume. At least then you have a scene where Martha has some input. Like she's like, you really need a cape on there, or that color is it's way too bleak. You should make it brighter, or something like that. Some sort of input. I think
or like you need like an S, like or like something.
Right. Something where she is providing some input on it. I think that works great because it shows that it's a combination of those two worlds.
Have you ever read Tom DeHaven's It's Superman?
Yes. Yeah.
That has one of my favorite explanations for the costume. It's obviously not Martha, but like in that book, it's basically he plays a stuntman for it's not like he's still trying to figure out what he's doing. So he's a stuntman in Hollywood, and he gets the Saturn Man costume, and he goes like, "Oh, I'll just go on Halloween, and because I've got this costume." And then he saves the day, and then it becomes Superman. And I was like, yeah, that's a snazzy way of doing it. Like, okay, cool. I love that book. It's not perfect.
It was okay. I mean, I liked it as like this Elseworlds type of artifact thing, but I don't like the idea of like I think the idea that it's a cute little thing, but I do like the idea of the costume somehow being something that he creates with input from both worlds. I think that's
No, I agree. I just like that story.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool story. I completely forgot about that book. I read that like back when it first came out, I think.
Yeah, there's it has I think my favorite, and I homaged it in Sons of Fire, because I just love this moment where the story starts off with Clark getting interrogated or like questioned about a shooting that happened at this movie theater, and he protected his friend, and the entire time Clark has like his hand closed, like in like as if he's holding something, and then it was revealed that like at the end of it he caught the bullet and he has no idea how that happened. And it's like, I love that moment. It's just like, and then it's like he's just I just, what does that mean? How can I have done this? Like, I just don't understand. And I there's in Sons of Fire, my upcoming graphic novel, spoilers, there's a scene where this one character literally catches a bullet, and he's sort of like, just he sits there and he gives the bullet to his friend, and it's just like, I caught a bullet. I caught a bullet. And I think that's just yeah, that's tip of the hat to Tom DeHaven.
Yeah. What do you think about, and we want to wrap this up with a few different things. I want to talk about some of the other cast. What do you think? Zod's probably the biggest one to talk about. I like Michael Shannon's performance, but I think I don't know, maybe it's just maybe I'm just spoiled by Terrence Stamp, but I like the idea of Zod as being much more cold and calculating, whereas here he's kind of a madman, and he's got this zealotry to him, which I can understand why they did it that way. It's just, it's not my preferred take on Zod. I don't know. What did you think of that?
It's weird because like Michael Shannon, God, he's such a great actor. And there's so many really great moments of like, I will find him. It's I kind of liked this take on him, this sort of zealotry, but again, I think it like to the sort of larger point is there's a lot of really great ideas, and I think it's a really cool, I think in and of itself, it's an interesting take on the character. The execute, like the fact it just doesn't sync with the rest of the story. Like it doesn't make sense. It's like, wait, so he wants Superman for what? No, why?
Well, something else too is I don't understand the point of terraforming Earth to be Krypton, because you are more powerful on Earth than you've ever been on Krypton. So why do you want to, especially someone like Zod? I mean, like, why would you want to take away that advantage you have?
Also, like, that just seems like more fucking work. It's just like you have a bunch of like, you have people, you just get it on, or because he wants to like have the fucking Matrix or some bullshit like that. And that's the thing, the Codex, like, what? That's like, and that is one of those. That's like an artifact from like the John Byrne, right? Where like the idea that I which also because in that too, like, because John Byrne's whole idea for that was he wanted Superman. He wanted Clark to literally be born on American soil because it was the birthing matrix that took him. So he wasn't born when he left Krypton. It was kind of like, then he was born on Earth basically, because he wanted Superman to be a naturally born U.S. citizen, which I think completely misses the point of what the character's refugee story is all about. Right. And like, you can, if you want to say it's like naturally born on Earth, and that like, that's almost like it can be a refugee story where like my mom crossed like borders to find safety so I could be born someplace safe.
Yeah,
there is that aspect of it. Like, I can see that thinking, but like, I think it's just been a bad trope to the whole Jesus aspect of it, where like you put more importance on a character, and I think that's like another conversation, a larger conversation about how audiences and fans tend to put more importance on things than the story should put them on, put on them. Like, I think making Superman the first like naturally born super like a Kryptonian, and that he has the Codex embedded in him, makes him somehow more special than he already is.
Mhm.
And that's what motivates Zod to be there, and et cetera, when really all you really just need, like, I think what makes Superman special is because he is here,
Right.
you know, and he has been given this chance to have this life. And so it's I don't know.
Yeah, I think there should be an element of chance in Superman's story. I mean,
I think there should be, yeah,
because they take a lot of that out in both the Donner cut and in this one, where they it's Earth is specifically chosen for, and it's just like or like in Smallville when it went further, where Jor-El spent time in Smallville and he knew the Kents, and then he specifically chose and it's like that's taking it too far. Like it should not be that preordained.
I like that idea of Superman, like they just shot him out and like
exactly,
he just happened to land on Earth. I like that. That's it. Yeah, like it's funny. It's like I say this as like someone who has turned like not the Green Llama the Green Llama into sort of a bit of a chosen one thing, but it's a little bit more squirrely than that. It is much more refreshing to have characters just be like special because they're special, not because of any like other like outside reason.
Just want to quickly run down some of the other casts, because I think one of the things that frustrates me about the Snyder movies is they're so well cast, except for Ezra Miller and Jesse Eisenberg. But the rest of them, the cast is amazing, but they're not given the material they need to really make these characters work. And I like, Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White, brilliant, perfect choice,
great.
But then in Batman v Superman, he's constantly on Clark's ass about sports articles when Clark's not even a sports reporter. It doesn't make any, and it made me wonder, like, does Zack Snyder know how newspapers work? Because I don't think that's how it works. Or when it's just like where he's completely jaded and everything. And I think that's I mean, I understand he's gruff, but he's not a dick. And I think they make him too much of a dick in these movies. Or we get Steve Lombard in these movies for the first time in live action. I think that's a good choice. I think Michael Kelly's a great guy to pick him, but we don't do anything with his character. Russell Crowe, I think it's one of the failings of the Marlon Brando kind of setting the standard is everybody thinks we have to have some old actor to play Jor-El. When really, you think about it, well, his son was just born. He's probably not going to be in his 60s. It makes sense for him to be closer in age to Henry Cavill, and I like they went with the younger Jor-El, and I think Russell Crowe does a really good job. Everything they did with Krypton is amazing in this movie. It's a nice new take on it. Although I don't like that the Fortress is just a derelict spacecraft, but that's a different story.
I actually like that. And I'll tell you why, because it was just like, oh wow, like it's like an ancient ship that like is Kryptonian, and like it was just like, oh, that's an interesting. I just felt like it was an interesting take. It changed like.
I think it's too. For me, it's a bit too coincidental.
Okay.
I mean, that does work. But it also, it is, he did choose that planet, so I guess it works in that context. But you got to. I go back to the chance aspect of it. But anyway, that's just my thing. I also about the Fortress, but I do like I do like everything else to deal with Krypton though.
And I also like that sequence with like Amy Adams, Lois, and Jor-El, and they're like behind you, and she's like trying to get out of the ship. I really like that.
I thought that was a little bit too much. I think we're taking the ghost dad thing a little bit too far in that
fair,
scene.
Fair. To that. Yeah. And so like I liked Russell Crowe. He was fine. I think there's some interest. Like again, it's weird. Like the Krypton aspect is it feels like another movie. Like you're kind of like, I kind of wish I almost wish they just started with him showing up on Earth, and let like Krypton be something else.
There's a little bit, as much as I like what we see of Krypton, there's a little bit too much happening there, because you've got the Civil War with Zod happening at the same time the planet's blowing up. It's too much happening at once, I think.
Look, and that's a problem with a lot of modern blockbusters right now, is that they it's always about like bigger stakes, like all these different complications, when you really is just sort of like, again, and I say this as someone who's writing the really complicated novel right now, like boil it down, like what is the story about, like just like focus on this, like let it be like the planet's getting destroyed. You don't need to get it like more complicated than that. I think like the Civil War is like an artifact from the Abrams flyby, which is I would love to ask him about that book. That
I haven't
story.
read it, but I
God,
know that there's some
It's-
podcasting company. They did an audio drama of that.
really.
Yeah. I'll look it up and I'll
Man.
tell you about it later. They also
Please.
did the Kevin Smith Superman Lives script and the Gilroy Superman Lives script too. And they also did like
Interesting.
I think like one of the Batman Year One scripts they did as well. So there's a whole bunch of them they've been doing. I'll send
nice.
hang
Please.
around after we're done with the show and I'll send you the
Yeah.
list. I think Diane Lane too as Martha. I think in this movie she does a really good job. When we get into BES, it's a different story, but I do like that she actually gets something to do, which other than Smallville, Martha has never had anything to do in any of these movies. And I do like that the whole idea of like her helping Clark train his, that's such a great sequence in the school when she's telling him how to use his powers and
like a middle of the ocean line. Yeah.
And I like that we get that aspect of, and we see her have a relationship with Clark, because in Superman the movie, she's always just kind of there. And then they have this heartfelt goodbye, which it feels very stilted when they're talking like that. And it just doesn't work. Or in, Superman Returns, we get Ava Marie Saint, who does great in this very small bit, but she doesn't, there's no really real purpose for her to be there in that movie.
It's weird, and I think that's like one of the weirdest things that we happen to see in a lot of these movies. Like they're there because they're in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorite lines from Josie and the Pussycats. Like, why are you even here? Like, I was in the comics. You have like the inclusion of like, and I think like that's like the Jimmy Olsen of it all. Like they're like, well, we should use him. He's there. It's just like you could have not used him.
And I do like the twist, like both Man of Steel and Superman and Lois, they did a twist on the Clark Lois thing. And I think they both work in different ways. Like I like the idea that she starts off knowing that Clark is Superman. Like I think it speaks a lot to her as an investigative journalist and her instinct. I think that works really well. But I also like what they did in Superman and Lois, where she doesn't give a shit about Superman. She's more interested in Clark in this in this mild mannered kind of guy, Midwestern charming
that was
guy.
That was a really nice.
That was cool. I like
a really nice touch.
I like they did these different things playing with it, as opposed to, because again, as much as I love the Donner film, it is, Lois goes a little bit too gaga over Superman, and she gets kind of like into schoolgirl mode.
Yeah, but to be fair, when he looks like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I saw the pictures of that. Zack Snyder released a picture. They'd done a test of Henry Cavill in the Christopher Reeve suit just to see how he'd look.
So much better.
But the weird thing is, and it's like, I think it's something about Christopher Reeve in that suit is like, it only works on him. It doesn't seem to work on anybody else in the same way. And I think that's one of the reasons. I think it's something about Christopher Reeve and just like the way he stands, the way he his demeanor, something about him. Only that guy can work in that suit. Nobody else seems to make it work.
Right.
Sorry. And I think that's basically pretty much all I had to say. Is there anything else you wanted to say about it?
Not much. I mean, I think again with Man of Steel, it is a film that I'm glad exists because it becomes this interesting artifact that we get to, again, sort of gives us better context of this character and of this period of time that it was made. I think it fails spectacularly in a lot of ways, but it succeeds in ways that other films haven't. It's a very mixed bag. It's in some ways time has been crueler and kinder to it than other Superman films. Yeah, I think so too. And I really think Warner Brothers is making a mistake if the rumors are true, because take everything with a grain of salt, but the big rumor is that in this new Flashpoint reality that's going to be created after the Flash movie, Zod kills Kal-El as a baby. So, and I don't know how true that is. Yeah, I'm not sure either. But what I'm reading on that one is that is the universe that she is from. Maybe that's what I was thinking too, and I hope that's what it is, because I think there's so much potential that Cavill has as Superman, and I think he could be really amazing. And we get these flashes of him, and it's just like we just need a director that actually likes this character. Yeah, because Snyder clearly doesn't. Yeah, well, I mean, even
I've seen, and you've done an interview with him, so I'm not sure if you talked about this.
He's lovely.
But one of the things I read in an interview that he did was talking about what he would want to do with Superman going forward, and he talks about everything that you should see in Superman.
He really wanted like this symbol of hope.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he wants this character to go, and it's incredibly frustrating that he is not being able to do that. The thing about Cavill, what I love about Henry Cavill is that he is the sexiest fucking geek you've ever met. Like, he is, like, there are so many times that like actors will say like, I was a fan of the comics, blah blah blah. Like, bullshit, you never read that thing till you got the money. And if you did read it, you didn't actually care. Like Cavill,
like Halle Berry saying like suddenly overnight becoming a Storm fan.
Oh yeah, like but like Cavill, motherfucker plays Warhammer. Like that guy's a nerd, dude. He's a nerd who made good and like is ripped to hell. Like, so he's.
I was reading something in the trivia too, like, because they were talking about waxing his chest for the shirtless scenes, and he specifically said, no, in Death of Superman, he's got a hairy chest, so we should keep. And it's like he's like, guys actually throwing out literal comic references when people say. So I think that's definitely seems legit.
It's a bummer that he hasn't gotten a chance to do something more.
Yeah. I mean, I still want to see him. I mean, other than seeing him get a real shake of Superman, the one thing I would think I would probably sell my left nut for is getting him to be in a Cold War era James Bond movie.
That would be cool.
Because like him in Man from U.N.C.L.E., he was basically a Cold War era James Bond, and he was perfect. And he was the only good thing about that movie. The rest of it, I could, I don't care about the rest of it. But Henry Cavill, give me a Henry Cavill as James Bond movie. That's what I want to see. But
I'd be down with that.
Yeah. But yeah, I hope that they're able to. I mean, as much as I love Tyler Hoechlin, it would be nice to see Henry Cavill get a fair shake as Superman. And I really hope that the rumors are not true with everything that's been said about it. I mean, but it's beyond my pay grade. So.
Yep.
All right. But anyway, we've probably talked enough about Zack Snyder and Man of Steel. I mean,
probably more than we ought to.
Yeah. But the one nice thing is like this is the end of the Snyder directed films. At least we still haven't talked about Suicide Squad, but all the Snyder films, completely done with in the DCEU talking about them. And the first one was the best one, basically. I mean, it's not a bad movie. It's just a frustrating movie as a Superman movie. And
100%.
And I saw an article just as I was, about to sign on this morning. I think it was Crack that posted it, saying that basically, Man of Steel is basically an anime adaptation of a Superman story. And it's, like you give Zack Snyder a Dragon Ball Z movie or something. I think he'd do great with that.
He would love that. He would love that.
No pretension, no deeper meaning. It's just straight up guys blowing each other up for, 2 hours. I think he'd do great with that.
He would. He totally would.
Adam, it's always fun to talk with you. This is a great
always
discussion,
a pleasure, Perry.
Always. Tell people where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Adam Lance Garcia, on Instagram at Adam L. Garcia, on TikTok at Adam Lance Garcia. And if you want to listen to my Green Llama audio drama, it's available on all of your favorite podcast apps. Our first season is completely streaming. And if you want to read some more stories about the Green Llama or just really anything I've written, just type in Adam Lance Garcia at Amazon or your favorite bookseller and you'll find stuff I've written.
Okay, great. And as always, we're at superherocinephiles.com, Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram, and we've got a Facebook page as well. Please make sure to like us, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. That does it for now. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Join our Facebook group by searching for Superhero Cinephiles, where you can interact with us and other superhero fans. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a regular supporter at Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which can be found at our website, superherocinephiles.com. If you buy or rent any movies through the Amazon links at our site, it helps support the show. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.